I am Sha'Ron James of Counsel Shareholder and Government Affairs Consultant with Gunster. Thank you for joining us for the inaugural webinar of All Lines, a webinar series for entrepreneurs, insurance professionals, executives, attorneys, and consumers to gain valuable insight into Florida's risk and insurance marketplace. Today's webinar will be recorded. The link to the replay can be found on Gunster's YouTube channel or on gunster.com shortly after our session. We look forward to an engaging conversation and encourage our live audience participants to ask questions. The audience will remain in listen-only mode. You may submit questions using the questions pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. Your questions will be sent to the organizer directly without other attendees seeing them. If you can't see your control panel, it may be collapsed. To expand it, click the orange arrow in the upper right-hand corner of the Grab tab. I will now turn it over to my colleague and co-host, Julie Fess, to introduce our guests and kick off this very insightful conversation. Julie?
Thanks, Sha'Ron. Senator Brandes was elected to the Florida Senate in 2016, and Florida's term limit laws means he will retire from the Florida Senate next year. Prior to his election to the Senate, he served in the Florida House. I've had the privilege of working with Senator Brandes mostly on the property insurance public policy. To say he's one of the most prolific, innovative, and intelligent senators is an understatement. Most years, he files over 60 bills and works them hard. He files legislation related to renewable energy, autonomous vehicles, ride sharing, electric bicycles and scooters, criminal justice reform, property insurance, juvenile justice, marijuana, and the list goes on and on. If you've not seen the senator in debate in committee or on the Senate floor, you've missed one of the great wonders of the world, in my humble opinion. He speaks with passion and commitment to his position because what he says is the truth. He is not a popularity contest and does what he believes is right without hesitation, and because of this, his colleagues respect him. He has 4 beautiful children under the age of 16, and we are so happy that his wife shares him with us and the people of Florida. We thank her knowing that his time away has to be difficult. Last session, he spoke passionately in committee and on the Senate floor about the need for property insurance reform. He warned that if changes were not implemented, the market would fall, rates would increase upwards 40 to 60%, and Citizens, which is the state-backed insurer of last resort, would become flooded with new policies. We're seeing that happen now. Senate Bill 76, which he co-sponsored and advocated for passage, became law on July 1st. Before the bill was even in effect, a challenge was filed in federal court to prevent a key part of this legislation from being implemented. Senator Brandes, can you talk about what you see happening with this challenge and what happens now with property insurance rates in Florida?
Yeah, so thanks, first of all, thanks for having me on. And I think it's important that we kind of lay the groundwork. So if we use just one kind of factor as the barometer for the health of the Florida insurance market, and we'll use Citizens Property Insurance as that kind of overall barometer. Before we started session this year, so in January or February of this year, Citizens was growing at about 3,000 policies a week. It is currently growing at 6,000 policies a week. So every day that Citizens doors are open for business, they have 1,000 policies walking in the door. We see that trajectory just continuing to grow as overall the market continues to pull back. And that's going to be really highlighted in the commercial residential space after Surfside condo, what happened at Surfside. You're going to continue to see that industry face some real challenges as there's the uncertainty of how the legislature is going to proceed with Surfside. But overall, in the property insurance marketplace, they've really had a disastrous 4 years. And you can go back and listen to the earnings calls of the insurance companies, as I've done over the last few weeks in the second quarter, and realize that some have lost $150 million over the last 4 quarters. That has led to investors pulling away from the market, which has led to the companies wanting to diversify outside the state of Florida because most of their profitable business is now being written outside the state, and they're really struggling to find a pathway forward in the state. We've lost, obviously, a number of insurance companies over the last few years. We've lost some in the last couple of months, and we see that trend continuing as well. Towards the end of the year, I think you probably got 3 or 4 that are likely to be really struggling here by the end of the year. So I say all that to say we're on this unsustainable pathway. Earlier in the year, the commissioner of the Office of Insurance Regulation, Altmaier, came out with one statistic. He says Florida represents 8% of total US property claims, but we are currently 76% of litigation. That should terrify everyone. And you know, and you can see this. I mean, look, you know, if you go outside in Florida, you see two things. You see the sun and you see a trial bar billboard. Those are the two kind of things what happens when you look up. And that kind of highlights how unsustainable this market is. So the legislature really has to get its arms around this thing. I think if we had passed Senate Bill 76 as the Senate version, it would have been essentially an 80% fix to what's going on in the marketplace. But I think you're going to see some real market shifts going on over the next few weeks, over the next few months and years, as the entire industry readjusts to this litigation economy, which has developed. Essentially, you have turned these law firms are now smoke billowing factories of lawsuits, and they are churning out tens of, if not hundreds of lawsuits in a week. Some of them are just that's all they do, and they have a whole machine designed to generate lawsuits. And the insurance companies are ill-equipped to handle the volume of lawsuits and the concentration of lawsuits. And what originally started as lawsuits that largely affected South Florida has now metastasized into lawsuits that are really around the state of Florida. And so that's the kind of general framework that we're dealing with and what the legislature has to dig out of.
So you mentioned certainty about that. What do you think happens this session in regards to what happened down there?
Sure. So my guidance to the state is be cautious. I'm actually shocked that we haven't actually started a grand jury investigation into this already. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we've missed is they should have immediately issued, or hopefully in the next coming weeks, they'll issue a grand jury to really do a deep dive and come up with recommendations. I think that they have to be cognizant that we have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of residents who live in these older condos. We have to be thoughtful about how we move forward. It can't be a knee-jerk, reaction and cause massive disruption, massive property devaluation in in all of these older condos. I think logically what they will do is to say, every 5 years you have to have, after your building is 40 years old, or maybe at your 30th anniversary, you have to have a review. But there needs to be some type of engineering reports done on these older buildings, and they're going to find things. They're going to find something, and we have to have a process by which these older condos that are not reserved for what they're going to find have the ability to address those over time. But largely, it's going to be insurance company driven and insurance company led. It's going to probably require that the condo minutes be available to the insurance company so that they can review what's going on. But my guidance is the simpler we can make it, the better off we're going to be. It should be simple and straightforward, and it should have some realistic timeframes to it. So we say, within the next 3 years, within the next 5 years, the older condos you have to start this process and go from there. It can't be an instant shock to everybody, which is likely the knee-jerk reaction that the legislature will give. But it's my goal, my hope that we will push back on that and provide a reasonable pathway forward.
Last session, the legislature voted to repeal the state's no-fault personal injury protection auto insurance coverage, PIP.
Yeah.
And instead require bodily coverage starting, I think, $25,000 for all Florida drivers. I know this was a very controversial measure, and in the end, the governor did veto the bill, and you were an opponent of the bill. What do you see? Do you see this bill coming back next year? What are your thoughts on that as an opponent?
Yeah, I think the problem was it wasn't all that controversial until the three of us stood up and said, we don't do this. There was only 3 senators to my knowledge that voted against it. I don't know how many House members voted against it, but it was probably less than 5. But the truth is the legislature threw this piece of legislation out there and it made it through committee. And had we passed what went through committee, I probably couldn't have gotten to the point where I voted for it. But that's not what happened. They threw something completely different together on the floor. And they had no research, no studies, nothing that backed what they were talking about. Nobody had actually done an actual analysis of this thing. They were using something from 2016, which was even radically different from what they proposed. So any responsible board that I've ever sat on that was about to change the lives of 12 million of their customers would have, gone out and hired McKinsey, gone out and hired Milliman, and had done a research logical report. Unfortunately, that's not what the legislature did. It decided to throw a bunch of ideas against the wall and see if they could make anything stick, and realized that the governor was smart enough to actually have the research done beforehand before he signed the bill. And what the research said was, for anybody who was at the bottom end, who was just buying the minimum amount of insurance, they were likely to pay between 40 and 70% more in insurance. And for many other people, this wasn't going to be nearly the savings that it was pitched as, because they were already carrying that level of insurance. And so I talked to the lobbyists from State Farm, and they were saying, well, 80% of our customers already have this level of insurance, so it doesn't really affect us all that much. Again, the litigation economy is what's driving this. The other major problem Florida has is 20% of our drivers, 1 in 5, have no insurance. This bill would have raised that to 1 in 4. How does that help the overall market if we have more uninsured drivers? So the problem that you have is this legislation was largely driven by the Senate, was not thought through, was not backed by any actuarial science at all, and ultimately crashed on the rocks of the governor's desk because there was nobody really guiding the ship. It was thrown against the wall, and frankly was incredibly irresponsible for the House and Senate to push this bill forward. And anytime you have, Gary Farmer singing the praises of an insurance bill on the Senate floor, we should have red lights going off on the Senate chamber, because there's a problem here. And that's what happened with this bill. You can go back and watch his glowing testimony of how much he loved this legislation. Like, that should be the, red alert that there is something wrong in this bill.
It's fine. For the last year or more, we've seen the construction material costs skyrocket. And being in the wholesale lumber business yourself, what's happening with the industry, and could this ultimately affect our real estate market? What are your thoughts on that?
I think largely that ship has passed, and that ship has sailed. The lumber prices are down dramatically this year. I mean, we bought a boxcar last week for $40,000 that we were buying for $140,000 just 4 months ago. And so we're seeing a pretty broad reduction in those prices as far as lumber and building materials. You aren't seeing that in availability of appliances, obviously cars. All of those things have a very different time horizon on when those are going to become available and the pricing going on in them. But in the lumber and building supply market right now, at least in lumber, we're seeing that price coming down. Now, I think that will be delayed somewhat for builders, because obviously lumber dealers are trying to kind of keep their prices as much as they can as they try to unload their older inventory. And extract as much value out of that older inventory as they can. But over time, I think that this is a world that's going to be awash in lumber here shortly for a short period of time. And then I think they're actually going to normalize at a higher level. I think that the market understands that it can get a higher price for it. People are willing to pay it, largely driven by low loan costs and the ability to finance that over the longer term. But Florida's growing at 800 people a day. That is largely spread out, but also concentrated in the major urbanized environment areas, but obviously growing into areas like Lakeland and Ocala as well. So, because that's where the cheaper land is, and so we're seeing the huge demand in this marketplace for lumber and building supplies. That is, and 1 or 2 big hurricanes could throw the whole math off. But the limiting factor right now is not supply of lumber, it's really supply of labor.
Okay. All right, let's talk about some of the fun things that you enjoy. When you were first elected 12 years ago, you're like one of the first leaders that I heard, just pushing technology and autonomous vehicles and talking about it and the need to get the state ready for autonomous vehicles. And each year in the transportation bills, I've seen you put language in that prepares our roads and highways. So what do you see happening with autonomous vehicles? I mean, I know that there's been some lawsuits, there's been some that have, crashed and stuff like that. I mean, what do you see happening with autonomous vehicles?
So there's really kind of three mega trends going on in the world of mobility right now. The world's getting more shared. We can obviously see this with the rise of Uber and Lyft. It's getting more electric and it's getting more automated. So if we think about timeframes, 2010 to 2020 was really the emergence of the shared economy. That's only going to grow as we go forward. I think 2020 to 2030 is the emergence of electric vehicles. Today, electric vehicles are less than 2% of the vehicles on Florida's roadway. By the end of the decade, they will be between 15 and 25% or more of all new cars sold. So a radical shift, unlike really anything we've seen in our lifetime, is about to occur for the internal combustion engine. And that will have massive ramifications for the auto industry and for the larger kind of ripples of the auto industry as a whole. For example, if a gas station's barely making it today, largely, that gas station will have to find another use in the next few years, because more or less people aren't going to be buying gas. 85 to 90% of people charge at home. So we're going to see some disruption in the real estate market as it relates to certain businesses. For the automaker, for the auto dealer, you're going to see a pretty big shift too. About 60% of their business is in revenue from their company comes in service, not sales. Well, electric vehicles need less service. There's less moving parts. You're going from an internal combustion engine, which has 1,500 moving parts, to an electric vehicle, which may have less than 150. And things that don't move typically don't break on a vehicle. And so what we're seeing more and more of is going to be I think there's going to be a pretty big fight between the auto dealers and the manufacturers as the dealers try to figure out the business model in this emerging world. And so we're going to see a pretty big disruption occur over the next decade in that space as well. And that's going to continue to play out in the utility grid as well. Today, most energy is used between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. But towards the end of the decade, we made actually what they call flip the grid, which means most of the energy will be used from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. as everybody's charging their electric vehicles, which makes us rethink our grid. But it'll also allow some opportunities, because now we can store energy and play an arbitrage of energy stored in electric vehicles. We may be able to plug in at certain times and then draw down. And I might be able to, as a car owner, sell some of my energy that's stored in my car back to the grid at a higher price. Now, these sound kind of like crazy ideas, but I think it's something that people need to be thinking about, and the utility industry needs to be exploring, is if we can generate solar during the day and I can store that solar energy in my vehicle, then I can sell it back at a higher price in the evening to somebody else, or during the day when air conditioning is being needed. So it's going to create an interesting arbitrage opportunity, but it also means we probably need to be doubling down in our investment in the grid to recognize that we're going to have a world awash in electric vehicles that are going to need very different things than historically we've needed. And that's even before we get to when the real autonomy shifts. Look, in what year will something roll off the factory line in China, be loaded by an automated forklift, be driven by an automated truck to an automated port, to an automated ship, to an automated port, to an automated truck, delivered to me automated, autonomously? Is that 2030? Is that 2035? 2040? I don't know the exact time, but that's going to happen. And the disruption that it creates in jobs, the safety factor that it creates in workforce safety, all of those things are going to massively are going to be a massive shift. But that's the world that we're emerging into, and largely that will be a shared electric automated vehicle. And I think you're first going to see it in trucking, and then you'll also see it in delivery vehicles.
So what do you see happening with the gas tax? I mean, so now when you have more people in autonomous vehicles that aren't paying at the pump, how does this affect our roads, and how do we, I know there was a bill, I think last year filed.
Sure, I filed it to deal with the gas tax. So most states are adding a registration fee to electric vehicles in order to compensate that. That's probably a good short-term solution, probably something that will last till 2030, 2035. I sunsetted our bill at 2030 because I wanted that legislature to take a look at the new solutions. At the federal level, in the current infrastructure package, they're looking at a pilot program for a vehicle miles traveled fee. Ultimately, I think that's probably where we go. But that requires that you get away from the gas tax totally. The big challenge with the gas tax is it's really inexpensive for us to collect the gas tax. We actually don't collect it directly from the retailers. We collect it from the wholesalers. And because we're only dealing with a handful of wholesalers, we're only collecting from 5 to 10 kind of major firms that are the wholesalers to the retailers. We don't have to track down 6 million individual vehicles in the state of Florida and make sure they're all paying tax. We're looking at 10 or 20 or 30 wholesalers. That's all we have to track down, and we're pretty used to getting a wire from them. So going to a scalable solution for 6 million people is very different. Something the feds are going to have to figure out, but in the short term, it's probably going to be an increased registration fee that is set at some $150 to $200 amount to compensate the state for the avoidance of that gas tax that occurs with electric vehicles today.
Okay. So we're seeing right now the first 3D printed house being built in Tallahassee. I know this is something I've heard you talk about, and I'm just curious what you think about this. What do you think about this technology? Are these homes going to be built to greater standards than conventionally built homes? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, what amazing technology. I was watching some of the videos. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, look, that's coming, right? So it's partially due to labor shortage, partially due to just the technology. 3, the controls that you can put in place, and the strength that you can build these houses at, the ability to both wire and to build the concrete around the house at the same time. But I think that's really the future of where we're going. The ability to kind of build into houses furniture and other design features that just are not available today, given the current construction mechanisms, or not available at a reasonable cost. We're going to be able to see all new kinds of designs, all kinds of layouts, and the ability to quickly change designs and to figure out how to engineer these houses in a better way. That technology is all coming. We've got a company that's now based in Florida called Local Motors that does 3D printed vehicles. And what used to take them 8 weeks, they can now get done, and I think it's 12 hours to build a vehicle. When that occurs in housing, the ability to kind of pour the foundation and then pour the walls and then have a crew come and do the interior walls, or to pour the interior walls as well. There's that technology is going to only improve over the next decade. But I would imagine, by the mid 2030s, a vast majority of new houses in Florida will utilize this technology for part or some of those vehicles. I mean, for the housing itself, but it's also going to occur in other pieces too. For example, the doors and other things, those may be 3D printed as well.
So tell us what you see coming up this legislative session. I mean, I know we have redistricting, which always is big every 10 years, but what other issues do you see that are going to be the major topics?
Well, I don't think they're going to take another stab at PIP. I think that the big challenges in Florida right now are two. One, we've got to do something on the insurance space. There is an insurance crisis going on. Rates are rising. It is the Achilles heel of the market. And the reason it's only been hidden so long is because interest rates have fallen, and as people refinance, they actually don't see the increase in their escrow that they're paying every month, or they don't notice it as much because they're able to refinance from 5% to 3% on a 30-year basis, or 3.5%, whatever. But that's mitigating the increased prices. That will not continue forever, and so we have to be able to solve this problem. Also, Citizens growing to 800,000 policies again, and having $200 billion of insured value, which is roughly where it will be at 800,000 policies, is terrifying, because Citizens last year lost money on a policy basis. The only reason it made any money is because it has $6 billion in investments and had some great investment returns. So, Citizens basically loses money on every policy it brings on, which is not sustainable as a business model. And largely its rates are about 30 to 40% below the market in most markets. Now in Monroe, it's probably 90% below the market, but in most markets it's 30 to 40% below the market. and it's only growing, it's only raising rates 5 or 7%, even though it's authorized to raise them at 10 or 11%. It's not doing that in most markets. So I think if you do see anything that occurs in Citizens, it will probably to make new homes and second homes go in at actually sound rates, because today we subsidize people to live in second homes, and I don't think any Floridian believes that that's what we should be doing, is to subsidize those homeowners. So you may see that in the property insurance world. I think you'll also see a glitch bill in that space. The other major area where we're in crisis mode is in the prison system and in corrections. But most legislators don't want to talk about that. Most legislators have never visited a prison. But I toured one last week, and at Union, they had 132 vacancies. They had 3 applicants. We are losing wardens left and right. We're losing 40% of our staff within their first year of hire will quit, 60% within 2 years or quit, or transition to a new job outside the department. But we have an utter crisis going on. And if you think about Florida growing at 800 people a day, some of those people are going to commit crimes. And because of COVID, we have, 30,000 cases that are unresolved. And many of those people are going to ultimately end up in the prison system. So while we have a prison population of 80,000 that we can't adequately manage today, we could have a population of a 90 or 100,000, which is where we were a few years ago, that we will be devastated to try to manage. And the legislature, and frankly, the leadership isn't looking at that problem the way they should be, because they're in crisis mode everywhere in the prison system right now.
Oh, definitely. So what are your major issues going to be this year? I know prison reform, those issues are always big. But...
So I think if you think about, overall, I don't do a lot of education work. I think Florida's got the most school choice friendly world education system in the country. And I think you're going to see us continue to push the envelope there. But education, I think Florida is where Florida's getting it right. Healthcare is largely federalized. And so other than adjusting scope of practice, which Florida needs to do and should do, I don't think the legislature is going to tinker too much in the healthcare space, other than around the edges. Really, they've got to get done. They've got to focus on insurance, criminal justice. I think they've got done as much as they want to do on agriculture. They may do a little bit more with the environment. Florida's going to have an affordable housing problem in the urbanized areas. It knows this. We've got to have a more proactive solution to dealing with that. It can't be just relying on the Sadowski Trust Fund, because while the Sadowski sounds like, you have $200 million or $300 million in Sadowski, when you divide that by 67 counties and you start dealing with the cost of what these projects are to build, I think my county has only built 300 to 500 units total of affordable housing, Sadowski money type apartment complexes in the last 5 years. And the need is probably 60,000. So that math doesn't work until the legislature wakes up and realizes that it doesn't create a sustainable process going forward. So I think insurance and criminal justice are probably where they need to spend their time. I don't know that that's where they will spend their time. I think it's going to be redistricting a budget and supporting whatever DeSantis wants to do.
Sha'Ron, I don't know if we have any questions out there.
We do, just a couple of things. One, to go back to some of this discussion regarding the property insurance reform. And Senator, I know you've touched on this some, but you mentioned earlier in your comments that there was a Senate version of the bill this past session, and there were elements of that bill that did not make it into the reform law. What were some of those elements? That was one of the questions that came in that folks are interested in knowing more about.
Well, the primary thing they could have done is some of the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms that we should have made available or required or allowed insurance companies to write into their policy that they require. But the big key one was actual cash value of roofs. If you talk to an insurance companies, as I do on a regular basis, the number one problem they're seeing is inflated roof claims. And because you can go back, or historically you could have gone back 5 years for a non-storm event and 3 years for a storm event, each storm was basically a gold mine for roofers. And we think a lot of these claims are fraudulent. And they were the Office of Insurance Regulation and the Department of Financial Services was anemic at best in dealing with fraud claims in Florida. And so we have enhanced our fraud fighting, but ultimately what we needed to be able to do was offer an actual cash value roof product at the HO3 level. Today we offer it at the what's the policy called? The DP3 policy. You can do it at DP, which is basically a rental policy. So I think what's going to actually occur in the marketplace is a couple of things. One, I think you're going to see a lot more people writing DP policies and then adding riders on so that it looks like an HO3 policy. But then two, I think we're going to move to a managed repair market. I think ultimately Florida is going to look like much like the world of healthcare, where we have a PPO product and an HMO product for property insurance. And you're going to start seeing a lot more managed repair networks coming online, and insurers participating in those alliances for managed repair in order to manage their costs and to deal with contractors that they know about. If you look at Citizens has this program, and what they've seen is a radical reduction in lawsuits of those that participate in the managed repair program because they offer a back-end guarantee. And I think ultimately that's where insurers are going to have to go in order to offer the insured affordable product. Is they're going to have to limit the amount of contractors that they work with, and go with a known contractor. Now there's some risk in that too, on the liability side and on the continuation side, but for the most part the insurers are just desperate to find a solution, because today largely they offer only a PPO product, and they're going to have to move to an HMO style or a DP3 policy, which limits their roof liability.
Thank you. We're fortunate to have folks participating and attending literally across all lines, i.e. the name of our webinar series. And so do you mind sharing just a little bit of insight related to healthcare or health insurance, and maybe even what you have seen over the years from a workers' comp standpoint? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to profess to be the legislative expert on workers' comp or health insurance. I don't sit on the healthcare policy committee. I haven't since I was a freshman in the Florida Senate. So I would be not the right person to speak to at an expert level on that issue. But what I do think one of the big challenges is in Florida is entry-level medicine, and who's going to be in that entry-level medicine position. And this is where I think Florida needs to have a conversation about expanding scope of practice. And it's one where the physicians are the biggest hurdles to expanding that scope. Had we not had Speaker Oliva, who basically burnt the ships in order to move to a more expanded scope market, nurse practitioners would not be allowed to practice at their level that they are today. We have to have that conversation in a variety of different fields. I've filed a bill for the last 3 years now to create an advanced dental hygienist, because I think one of the biggest problems we have in at least amongst children is cavities that are going untreated because most dentists don't take Medicaid. And we need to create some pathway for kids to be able to get to better oral health care. But more and more physicians that are leaving medical school aren't going into family practice. That void is going to be filled by nurse practitioners. And we have to recognize that. We have to adjust for it. And frankly, if people are going to go to school and go to residency for a nurse practitioner, they're going to want to go to markets where they can actually practice independently. Florida doesn't allow that, or hasn't allowed that. And we're going to have to shift in that marketplace thinking. And that's one of the big things that the FMA has pushed back on for years, is more independence for nurse practitioners. And while I think that's an area that health insurers are going to have to engage in that conversation somewhere along the line and have to help guide that conversation a little bit more, which they've been hesitant to do in the past, at least in my experience.
So one of the questions that also came in earlier, you mentioned struggling companies, and we know that we're not at liberty to discuss in detail, and name companies that may be struggling at this time, as you mentioned. But can you talk a little bit about what insurance consumers, most of us have some form of insurance product, should be looking for or looking out for or concerned about when you talk about the financial condition of struggling insurance companies?
Absolutely. So obviously in Florida, we have the Office of Insurance Regulation, we have admitted carriers, and we have not admitted carriers and the surplus lines carriers. To my knowledge, we aren't seeing a major problem in surplus lines carriers because they're, the surplus lines companies are like the lions of the Serengeti Plain. They're kind of the top of the food chain of insurance markets. But our admitted carriers are the ones that are really struggling. And what we're starting to see more and more of is targeted lawsuits against certain carriers. They realize that they're weak. They realize they can pick them up. They don't pick them off. They don't have the resources to deal with getting 40 lawsuits every Monday. And so more and more, we're seeing the struggling carriers, the ones that are the smaller carriers are the more likely targets for that type of targeting. Beyond that, what we're seeing is even the publicly traded companies struggling. And while they may not struggle to the point of failure, what they are going to do is restrict coverage and look to shift their markets elsewhere where they can actually operate in a profitable area. But the big challenge you're finding right now is this kind of negative feedback loop that companies are getting into, where they can't find investors, so they go out and take loans. And the loans that they're taking are at 10 to 15% interest rates, and that's obviously superior to investors, which hurts their next round of investors when they try to get their investment. And so I think at some juncture, you're just seeing people get exhausted by putting more and more money into these companies and finally throw their hands up in the air, which is what a number of companies have done over the last couple of years. They're essentially going to the OIR as much as OIR is coming to them and handing their keys in, because they recognize that they can't find investors, or they've put loans on the books which are superior to their investors, and they can't find investors that will come in an inferior position. And so once we see companies kind of take this negative feedback loop, start in this negative feedback loop, I think that's kind of the death nail for a lot of these firms. And I think people would be shocked to see how many firms have had to go to high yield loans in order to, or high interest rate loans in order to get the amount of capital needed to maintain on life support in Florida. And again, what we're seeing is wholesale pullback from major markets, the Tampa Bay market, coastal areas, the Orlando market, which used to be a very good market to be in, and where citizens used to have very little properties, has now become toxic for roofs, and more and more companies pulling out. But look, Barry Gilway stood in front of the Insurance Banking and Committee last year early on and said, Florida, you would be crazy to invest in the Florida insurance market in today's environment. And I think investors have heard that. And I think the market and the legislature hasn't done enough to stabilize the marketplace. And it's got to do more.
That's great insight. And so another question that comes up or has come up is, we continue to live through this pandemic. And in your view, is the legislature finished in terms of its response? Is there any insight or any thoughts about how we continue, particularly from a business standpoint, in the current environment?
Well, luckily, Florida has one of the most COVID-friendly liability laws in the country that we worked on last year and passed. The governor signed, and so we're, I think for the most part, the legislature has done its part to preserve businesses and individuals and homeowners and protect them from liability. I think the question now is really on the governor's side, as far as, does he declare another state of emergency given the Delta virus? I'm starting to hear more and more from hospitals that because we're not in a state of emergency, they're struggling because they can't bring in out-of-state nurses or out-of-state physicians, and we're, and that's becoming an increasing problem. So I think one of the things you may see from the governor's office more is maybe a limited state of emergency for hospitals in order to help them attract and bring in more employees from out of state, so that we can waive some of the requirements for in-state nurses and physicians that we currently have. But beyond that, I don't know that you're going to see a lot of out of the legislature, because we can only act during a 60-day period, but the governor has a lot more flexibility under emergency powers to act, and so I think you're largely going to see that leadership coming out of the governor's office, not the legislature.
Great. So those were all of the questions that have come through so far from the audience. Julie, I don't know if you had any more questions, or if you have anything else, Senator, that you'd like to share that we haven't covered. Again,
we've got a lot in the last 40 minutes.
We have.
Well, I tell you, I for one, would be very, very sad to lose you in the Florida Senate. And I don't know if you can talk to us a little bit about maybe what you want to do in the future, but we hope you're still around and, you know, participating. And do you have any, can you share any thoughts with us?
Sure. Well, I'm sure I'm going to stay involved at some level. I mean, the reason that I've decided to kind of put my political career on hold for a while is because my kids are so young. I have 3 kids who have never known me outside the legislative process. They know their dad disappears off the face of the earth for at least 100 days out of the year, and you know, I really want to watch them grow up for a while. And so I'm going to take the next few years and be involved at some level, but not to the level that I'm gone as much as I've been gone, and because I don't want to miss that part of my life. But I really do want to stay involved in the areas that I feel like I bring some value to the legislature in. One is in the world of transportation, where I've hosted an automated vehicle summit and really been a part of all the major conversations over the last decade. I mean, our team brought in Uber and Lyft. Our team has brought in the scooters and e-bikes. We've done all things with automated vehicles. We've kind of on the 4.0 version of that law right now. And there's a reason that Florida is so far ahead of most other states, is because we've had that consistent guidance over the last 10 years. And because we're consistently being the thought leaders in the state on kind of new mobility. So I think we're going to still play a role in the world of transportation. I think I have to play a role in the world of insurance, because I'm one of the few people that will stand up and I think truly tell people what's really going on in the world of insurance and how this game is being played, and provide some pushback to, you know, insurance companies are bad and, you know, the trial bar is the best thing ever. That's, you know, ultimately homeowners are the ones getting really hurt here, and that's my constituents. I live in Pinellas County. We are seeing rates, you know, if you can find insurance, you're seeing rates that are 25 to 30% higher than last year. And more of my homeowners are being forced into Citizens. And as you and I know, Citizens is truly backed by the citizens. If there's a big storm, we're all getting assessed. And so what it could be the largest tax assessment we ever see if we got a large storm that came through Florida, with the total insured value as large as it is in Citizens. And so everybody needs to be concerned about what's going on at Citizens. So I want to continue to play a role in the property insurance world. What I think I'm really called to do is work on criminal justice and prison reform. It's been a passion project of mine. You know, my team has visited probably more prisons in the last few years than most other legislators in the state. We continue to have a heart there. We continue to see the problems there. And frankly, it's been an area where, absent our leadership and our continued support, I think that Florida will continue to just ignore this entire population, and recognizing that 85 to 90% of your inmates are going to get out. The average inmate in Florida reads at the 6th grade level. It is not uncommon to go to a prison today and walk around that facility and see 1,500 inmates and 0 teachers. And because of the employment crisis we're in right now, we can't add new teachers because we have nobody to guard that classroom, even if we add the new teachers. So the staffing problem has now permeated every other function of the Department of Corrections, to the point where they are unable to provide anything else other than warehousing. They don't actually correct anything. And so people will stay with us 3 to 5 years, they'll get out, and they're actually worse off than then they went in. That can't be our goal. That can't be our focus. And so we have to reshift our focus to public safety, away from punishment. We've got to provide programming. And so I think we're gonna help stand up an organization over the next few years, over the next few months, that really begins that conversation and becomes the entity by which I participate in to the legislature for the long term.
Well, we appreciate everything you've done. You have such passion for the issues that you get involved in. You're an amazing senator. You know, we just appreciate you being here, and gonna miss you. Truly gonna miss you next year.
Well, thanks. We got 6 months. We're going to knock it out of the park. We're going to find that 6th gear, and we're going to do some great things. I'm so excited for this legislative session, And the great thing for me is I'm not running for anything.
Well, I
And
just
so,
wanted the Capitol this year.
what? Oh, they're going to let you in the Capitol. Yeah, that's going to happen. I think the pushback against that was, look, I think that's going to happen. So I'm not worried about that. But I am excited about the great opportunities. And frankly, the Senate works better when it has somebody who is unvarnished, who's willing to just go out and say things that everybody else knows or everybody else thinks but hasn't said. And I have taken the lumps of last year and grown from those, and they've put me in charge of government accountability, which I can't believe is I'm not sure there's a better spot for me to be able to talk about issues than a government accountability role, because I believe there's some places where the government needs some accountability, and we can talk about those in a committee hearing and explore some of the areas that I think are the most challenged. And I have broad authority to pull people in, so we're gonna be having those conversations. I'm excited about that.
That's going to be fun to watch.
Yes, it is.
They're doing an amazing job.
Thank you again, Senator Brandes, for being the inaugural guest for our All Lines webinar series. The amount of insight that you've provided today has been extraordinary. And as a firm and as a team, we look forward to this upcoming session and all that you have to provide. So to our live attendees, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your questions. And please be on the lookout for communication from us for our episode 2, All Lines. We'll be revealing our next guest very soon. So thank you all. You all have a great day. And we conclude our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.